Welcome to the Frequency Ma podcast with Sheena Israel and Alyssa Ma. Frequency Ma is a sanctuary for the oracular and the ordinary. We explore the interwoven paths of mothering, embodied business and prosperity, self-creation and relationship, spiritual technologies like channeling and frequency keeping. Expect earth and insights to catalyze your quantum leaps. For the multi-dimensional, multi-passionates, all of you is welcome here. Journey with us. Welcome to the Frequency Ma podcast. I am Alyssa Ma. I'm here with my co-host Sheena Israel, and we're so honored to have with us today Jade McWilliam of Sacred Wholeness. And Jade is a quantum practitioner, an energetic mechanic, and a primordial initiatrix whose work centers on template activation, physical regeneration, and multidimensional embodiment. With a foundation as a registered nurse and over a decade in the healing arts, Jade brings a rare ability to weave anatomical understanding with quantum mechanics, creating pathways for profound transformation. And her journey deepened in 2023 when she free birthed her son, initiating her into new dimensions of primality and expanded psychic capacity. And Jade describes herself as a celestial poet and etheric analyst who merges tones and textures of creation, acting as a spiritually androgynous bridge across all time and timelessness. And her methodology helps clients cut straight to the quantum core, becoming their whole authentic selves. So please join me in welcoming the luminous Jade McWilliam, whose work guides us toward anchoring deeper into what she calls the raw and erotic power of eternality expressed through human being. Welcome, Jade.
Thank you for that introduction. It's always beautiful to have like yourself reflected back because you form these things, so you try and put yourself into some sort of digestible packet when you're trying to share your work, but then to have it reflected back is always lovely.
Well, your words are just such rich textures to play in, so it's a delight to be swimming in your field, and we're so happy to have you here. I'd love to start off by asking about the way that you have moved through this motherhood portal. I know you've spoken about it on Instagram, and I've been personally quite curious, knowing your work before becoming a mother, and yeah, just having this delight and like watching you move through this portal, but also knowing that you through this initiation have met some um, some points of what some might call a challenge or adversity in the birth experience. And I'd love for you to speak into your experience with birth and how that's impacted how you work, both as a woman and as a quantum practitioner.
Um, I guess I'll share a little bit about my birth experience. I haven't publicly shared my birth story as such. I've spoken to bits and pieces of it, but as a whole, it was the most beautiful experience. It was my husband and we decided not to have a doula. I didn't want that. I really wanted the space to be private and contained. And we did a lot of work around feeling comfortable with it just being us, because my husband initially was, there was nervousness and there was fear and there was concern for what could happen in that space. But having a background as a registered nurse, I really understood physiological birth. I understood the body. I didn't hold fear around that aspect. So I felt really comfortable. It was more mitigating how he felt and bringing him into a safe space to support me. But the birth was, I woke up at midnight. I could feel some cramping and had a beautiful bath. And my husband's a deep sleeper, so he's sleeping through all of this. And was like shocked to find out like 2 hours later when I re-emerged that like I was in labor. He was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize. But it went on for 10 hours. I had a really beautiful first phase of my labor. It was really easy. It was very psychically open. We were just in a dark room through the night. I was having a lot of vision, a lot of meeting and speaking and guiding the spirit of my son down into the earth plane. And I really felt in that moment that, oh, I'm going to have like an orgasmic birth. Like I'm going to have a pain-free birth because this is so beautiful. Like I was so high on the oxytocin, and so psychically open that I really felt like it was just going to continue on in the same direction. Um, I switched into active labor. It was very intense. I only had an hour of active labor. Um, and it was really, really profound. It was beautiful. He landed. I had always had a sense that I was going to have a girl. I was felt really strongly connected to a feminine energy. And then when he landed and we looked at him, we sort of were like, oh, it's a boy. Okay, that changes things. So he didn't have a name for 3 days. And then it came through to be Ewan. He was conceived on Ewan country, which is over on like the far south coast of New South Wales in Australia. And it also was to do with the symbolism of the yew tree. So that immortality, the beginning and the end, always being able to drop down those branches. And it was just a really, really beautiful experience. And it was it was magical and it was perfect. And it really showed me my power in that active labor because it was intense. And then from that, within the following days, I was in a lot of pain and I knew something wasn't quite right. And then I I'm not too sure, sort of like the timeline, that phase is so intense, you lose like the scope of time itself. But I came to understand that I had a bladder prolapse. And then it wasn't until months and months later, almost until after he was probably one, that I realized that I had partial avulsion of the levator ani muscle on the left side. So that's the part of the deep pelvic floor. I pulled that off of the bone. And so it's like part of that is still intact, but part of that has been pulled off and is not like connected to that structure anymore. So that journey was huge because that created a huge rippling effect through my experience of motherhood. I had to physically heal. I had to confront the mental, emotional, and energetic aspects of what that birth initiation required me to meet. And so there was a lot of feeling, a lot of fear around my body, the injury, what my quality of life would be. Would I be able to regenerate the injury? A lot of victimization within that, feeling really victimized by that experience, that I didn't get to just have this beautiful birth. Like I had a beautiful birth, but the outcome sort of shifted the trajectory. I felt like that was like taken from me in a way. So there was this level of victimization there where I felt like I'd been robbed of something in that first birth experience. And that really left like this hollowing out within my heart and caused a lot of heart fracturing through my initial postpartum, as well as a lot of shame, a lot of internalized blame, a lot of fear of being open around my experience because I was worried that people would just feel that I'd caused that anyway by free birthing. So it was like I felt like I was living two lives. Like I had the external way that I interacted and held myself, and then inside I was like breaking down, dying continuously, having to build a resiliency and a capacity that I'd never had to before, not just with motherhood, but with how I engaged myself. So it was an experience that I never asked for. Like I never would have consciously asked to enter into that sort of experience. But arriving 2 years later, I can really see why I entered that. And I really view it as a necessary initiation and a portal for multiple things, but in the context of my work and my mission, it's brought me directly to the core of that work. And it had to force me through these pain points to build the capacity and to come into contact with having physical injury, to return to quantum technology and regenerative capacity of the body and what we really are capable of doing. So it was this very long-winded experience, and it continues to be an ongoing journey. Um, but yeah, it's one that it's really hard to place any clear label on, because it was so many different things all wrapped into one. And I think any motherhood journey is that, any postpartum is that. But dealing with injury on top of that and the shock of injury is it's so incredibly obliterative. It really, really takes you into a space of despair. Um, it requires so much of you, and you're already being asked of so much within tending to a new babe and making those adjustments to your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual being. So having that experience was grueling, deliciously grueling. I'll say it that way, because I'm at a point now where I've healed so much of the mental, emotional, and energetic aspects of that, as well as like physically. I've 80 to 90% corrected the prolapse. And then, I'm sure we'll get into through this discussion, the work with the avulsion is going to be something that I'm really focusing on and going deeper with through like a quantum approach.
I thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to reflect back to you, even just briefly, if I can, possibly, because there's so much there. And um, being only briefly familiar, like a little bit familiar with your work before, just through social media, when you did kind of emerge and started talking about motherhood, it was there was a context woven in your shares that was deeply reflective of my own journey. And hearing you share a little bit about your birth now, I can see why. It's like bringing it full circle, because there is in these moments for myself that it kind of brought a lot of that. Well, I like to say that I've had, one child, but two birth experiences in the process, in the journey of how that unfolded for me, and the physical healing after. It was grueling, deliciously grueling. And I too am so thankful for my experience, because it was a wild initiation that I could not have planned. Nothing could have prepared me for that. I just had to move through it. And I feel that when you started to share about motherhood, as I said, those codes were woven in, and it was like, I don't know, I feel like maybe many people might have experienced this as well. It's like being seen without calling it out. And there's a quantum connection there. I feel that is touching the hearts of mothers just in general. And anyway, I just want to thank you for that and share a little bit. I feel like a question wants to emerge, but it's not here yet. Hmm.
I think that's okay. I can weave us back in. But also thank you for sharing that, Jade. I'm sure many will resonate with those. Yeah, they kind of yeah, fearless way in which you're showing up and sharing about your birth story. And I guess I did have one question just because it was a something that we've spoken to prior to recording about like the fear of speaking out about free birth, because there is this kind of narrative that you are inviting injury. But I'm curious, as a registered nurse, do you think that like had your birth happened outside of that kind of cave, dark cave-like space, had it happened in a medical setting, would you have averted that injury? Would you have incurred additional injury? Like, is there a felt sense of like an alternative pathway available to you had a more traditional medicalized route been taken with your birth?
Yeah, I I feel very clearly within myself that I wouldn't have birthed well within a hospital setting. And I worked in hospitals. I know what the environment feels like. I know what it does to my body. And it was a big reason that I left nursing. And as we discussed prior to starting this, it plays in with like the neurodivergency and the sensitivity and being so aware of lighting, sound, temperature, presence in the room, all of those things, you know, in any way are going to impact you. Add in like an extra vulnerability or sensitivity to those things, they become like sirens setting your body off. And so I had zero interest, zero inclination to birth in a hospital setting. And even now, if I were to have a second birth, I would not be birthing in a hospital setting. I would free birth again. And um, I had a lot of biomechanical things with like I had a really strong anterior tilt. I had like some torsion through my body. So biomechanically through my pregnancy, I was really strong and fit, but I wasn't necessarily aligned. And
Mm.
so with him coming down into the pelvic bowl, and there just wasn't necessarily enough suppleness within the muscles, enough work with that to correct sort of like some structural components. But I think you learn these things, or you do, you don't. For me, I've really spent this past 2 years realizing, oh, my posture needs correcting this way. Oh, my breathing needs this way. Birth taught me, or the birth injury taught me that I've never known how to walk, to stand, or to breathe. Like I literally in my whole life had never stood correctly, had never walked correctly, had never been breathing correctly. And it's a really strange thing to be like, what have I been doing? How have I been existing? Because I've been so structurally unsound. And the irony there is that I was still very quantumly embodied and able to access, even though my physical body was quite contorted and struggling. So birth was like this corrective measure. And I don't see the injury as being something that has like weakened me and broken me down. It's been realigning. And it's been like I'm stronger now. Biomechanically, I'm really sound. I'm breathing more. I have correct biofeedback into different muscle groups, like my deep core, all of these components of my body that I never had a relationship with. I didn't know how to be what I was in the form. The birth injury pulled me down really aggressively, really hardly, and said, like, you cannot operate the way that you're operating blown out of the body anymore and allowing the physicality to be what it is. You really have to be in the body, landed. So no, I don't feel that I would have had a better outcome in a hospital setting. I don't necessarily, I can't say that I would have had a worse outcome. But I don't see the injury as a result of the birthing process alone. Like it's so much more than that. And for me, it's almost this like contracted piece that I had to go into. And look, like we have to engage things in a way that is empowering to us, and how we like find our understanding through our experiences. And for me, the understanding that I have of that is that I had to go into it to land my full self in my body, to reconnect with the truth that I know, to correct or like reopen and realign my access to God and my relationship with God. Because everything was very skew whiffy and like collapsed, and it was strange in the pregnancy and leading into that, where I'd stepped away from the ascension narrative and like the dogmatic material. So I was very much like, I want this relationship. I believe in these things. I want to work with this material, but all of the context has disappeared. The framework has gone. Where does that leave me? And, as humans, we're meaning makers. If we don't have a way of making meaning, we start to go a little bit crazy. We start to collapse. We start to implode a little bit. We need context. We need a structure that gives us the containment for our meaning. Like that's how we exist at this level. So for me, I went through almost like 3 years of that structure collapsing and really fighting, being like, I need context, I need a framework, I need the structure. And pretty much being on my knees going like, I need structure, I need to understand, God, what are you? What are we doing here? Why is this a fallen realm? Is this not a fallen realm? How am I supposed to engage this, my medicine, this technology? Because the framework that you operate within is going to determine how the medicine works. And that's like an integrity piece. You have to know that the system that you're operating within is going to shape the medicine. And I felt really strongly about that, of like, I'm not comfortable having my medicine move through certain frameworks anymore. So the birth was like the reorientation of all of that. It's like moving a huge energetic mass into a new state, shape, and way of being.
I love that you spoke into that discernment piece of, experiencing a preset framework like the Ascension framework, for instance, and then, because I feel like a lot of people can find themselves in this, seeking. And I think, what did you call it on your website? You said we're in a space where it's abundant, but we're also impoverished. We're also starving in a sense. And so this is the kind of context in which we find ourselves. We're seeking. And so when we have these kind of frameworks that feel a lot like what our medicine is, or feel a lot like they could hold our medicine, but there's just still something that's incongruent, that there's almost this kind of like revulsion, or this like, this energy in action to like completely reject out of hand um, that as a framework, and then to disidentify with the aspects of self that are resonant like on a different frequency. They are connecting in with the content of what's being discussed in these realms, and yet there's a tonal difference. And so I mentioned this too early, but I don't feel that your work is um part of that dogmatic structure, and yet there's a real felt integrity to how you weave. And I think a lot of it comes through the language that you use, which, we require to receive these transmissions through the digital, through the kind of physicality of language, words on a page. The power of that comes through that kind of embodied gnosis to give them this like, this punch that can, kind of penetrate through this digital realm. And so I think I'm kind of spiraling into a question around your use of language. Um, Although I am curious, actually, before I go there, let me stop myself. Is there anything that you would like to speak into on your birth, like the aspect of your birth and coming into this diagnosis of being neurodivergent? Is there anything there that you feel led to speak into? Because I think that's a very yeah, relevant topic.
Maybe I'll use that as a segue into the language piece, because it's kind of the same thing. Um, but yeah, motherhood for me, as I shared prior, was alongside the intensity of the injury, I found the experience of mothering like really, really intense. And not in a way, I wasn't lost to it. I was just so highly attuned to it that it impacted me to my core, even in the most mundane things. I really struggled to let Ewan be upset. It was like I could feel everything in every cell of my being. And I just found I started to become aware of ways that I was doing things, or the way that I experienced the world, the way that I experienced motherhood being different to the experiences of women that I was in connection with through like mothers group or different kind of like community groups within the town that I'm in. And it eventually led to sort of this circling of neurodivergency with a lot of resistance to that, because I had sort of like seen all of the like explosion of diagnoses and self-diagnoses and been like, oh, really rejected that and gone, oh, I'm not that. I don't want to be a part of that. I really don't like that space of just adopting things and over-identifying and then claiming that as what you are. And so coming closer to that was really confronting, because then I had to like swallow my pride and be like, oh, okay, I do need to go into this space and look at this. Um, and then it kind of came through of really ticking so many of those boxes and having those aha moments, looking back on my life, like having a lot of being really academic, but having school refusal, like full meltdown, like being a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl that like was like begging not to go to school, was so overwhelmed with school, but was doing really well and would school myself if I stayed home. And in year 12 was like being told that I was going to fail on attendance, but was doing really well, like getting A's on assignments and handing everything in before, but I wasn't meeting the criteria and the way of like performing or participating as to like their standard. So it kind of gave me this realization of it, just this confirmation or this validation of what I've been through, and that it like um it just reflected to me so many different things from childhood through my schooling, through my adult life, the way that I interact with people, the way that my thoughts are sort of processed, the way that I'm this sort of like synesthetic quality. If I hear sound impacts me at a really deep emotional level. Like the vibration of sound will really make me get teary straight away. It kind of like opens me. And it's not something I can control. So I just started to be like, oh, I have again another framework that I can understand myself within, but then I can take it and bring it into the lens that I want to use it. So for me, I see it as my brain is this way because I have a certain capacity to experience the world that I do for my work, for my medicine. I require a central nervous system that is like that so that I can receive and transmit information in a certain way. And so language for me is a really big piece of that. I really enjoy writing kind of these energetically provocative pieces that you fall into and you're hooked, and then you're like outraged or shocked, and it's a bit of a gasp factor. Or I like that. I like the rhythm and the cadence of like bringing people into something that you're experiencing. It's not just something that you're reading and you're going, oh, that's nice, that's beautiful. It's a really like heartfelt piece of information, or it's like it's pretty and it's packaged well. I like to use language as something that each thing is a portal, and it's not just what you're writing about that's creating the portal. It's the rhythm of the piece. It's like the way that it's spiraling, and as you're moving into it, all of a sudden you're hooked into a gravitational force, and then you're moving into it, and then you landed in the code itself. And so then all of a sudden you have this experience where you've read it and you've gone, like, what the hell was that? Because like my body just had some sort of movement. I was pulled into something. I find that really fun. I find that that's my form of play, is using language in a way that I know is going to be able to, like organically manipulate people's fields and bodies so that they can come into contact with material that they wouldn't otherwise come into contact with. So yeah, that's sort of how I use language, and we can go into that deeper, but just as the beginning kind of segue into that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I think, yeah, it's very much present that you have a masterful relationship with language as a quantum technology. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's like that you have the embodied gnosis to push forward um, the kind of code that you are putting forward for consumption or for, calibration with. I love how you put that. But I'm curious, kind of, you know, looking at language as a quantum technology or an anchor point between dimensions, um, how can we work with the technology of language and tone to kind of bridge this time in which we are coming into greater awareness around our sensory capacity and our extrasensory sensitivities, both collectively and individually. And, you know, I really, yeah, I'm curious, yeah, just to hear you kind of speak into um, yeah, ways that we can attune to our own use of language as that kind of a preparatory phase for more telepathic communication.
I think the biggest thing with the engagement of language is you have to be honoring the like your own energetic signature that's being imbued into it. It's like with anything, the minute we try and make it something that it's not, it just dissolves. It can't hold the structure. It can't hold like the string of information that it's trying to be and breathe, because it's being sort of like artificially created. So when we're engaging it, and I have a lot of people say to me, I think you need to like thin out your writing a bit. It's really like dense, it's confusing. I don't really understand what's happening. And for a long time, I was like, oh, maybe I do. And I have had seasons where I've tried to be like more direct, more of a direct download. And then when I write it, I think this is so bland. Like it doesn't hit the mark at all. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't convey anything. It's lifeless. It's like a shell that I'm handing over a husk and saying, here, enjoy this. And people look at it and go, oh, well, I really don't want to, like, that's not engaging. It's not entertaining. I'm not getting anything from it. But when I write in quite an elaborate and intricate way, even though people might not at a conscious level understand what's going on, it's so alive with me, my energetic signature, and then the information that I'm bringing through and sort of like filtering through them. So I think using language as a technology has to come through knowing yourself and knowing your energetic signature that's going to be the filter of your language. And it's sort of true for everything. It's that whole like know yourself. It's the core of like what we do. You can't utilize or express your medicine if you don't know how, like the body of that medicine, the essence of that medicine. And it's the same that's true for language and for the way that you're going to play and dance and create these kind of choreographic like scaffolding. It's you're creating another body, you're creating another form or another like domain for people to be in. So you have to really understand the quantum implication of what these things can do as a technology. And you don't want to be creating something that's kind of this warped, lifeless thing that's just trying to appease your ego so that other people accept you or understand you. It has to be something that's this beautifully, like, architecturally coded emanation of your being. And that's like, it's so true for whenever you're working with anything quantumly, you're always like creating these sort of like other fields, these other bodies, these other spaces for the consciousness to be moving through. And it's that whole like spheres nested within spheres. Language is very much that, and like the linguistics of like the frequency is a really beautiful space, but it's we're in I feel like we're in a really big shift with language. And I'm sure we could like speak to that in more of like a forking or a bifurcating way, because language is losing a lot of its essence and we're getting a lot of like colloquial slang. It's like void of potency. But at the same time, it feels like we're really starting to transition back in reclaiming language. And I think that is just referring directly to the fact that we're reclaiming bodies, we're reclaiming consciousness, we're reclaiming frequencies. And so naturally, as we begin to speak through those bodies, the language it's dancing in a different way. It comes out and it's a living transmission. And I'm kind of fixated on this idea at the moment of being a living transmission, that when you start to work with being such a like calibrated open channel, your whole being is this transmission. Everything you say, you can feel the frequency, you can feel the pitch, like the ebb and flow. It's the same within your breath, it's the same within your movements. And that impacts people. That creates shifts through the field. It creates this beautiful like melding and transference and then transfiguration. So language is so much more than what we think it is. It's like these entire fields, entire structures. It's a choreography. It's the way that we've chosen to transmit in quite an extensive part of humanity's history. We're in you know, I'm just thinking how to tie this in with telepathy or like cellular telepathy. And again, it comes back to the energetic signatures of your body. When you're reading the energetic signatures of yourself and you understand what your energetic signature is, you're going to start to be able to read other people's. You're picking up on like subtle energies. And so I don't think that we'll ever lose language. I don't think we'll ever I think it's too beautiful. I think it's too fun for us to like want to separate from. And it may evolve in a way that we can't see at this point in time. But I know a lot of people say that, you know, written word has been this digressive form and it really like captures and locks down communication. But I find it to be really expansive. I find it to be a really liberating pathway. And I use it as a processing method as well, because if I'm working with something and I need it to land and actually kind of like calibrate through the body, I'll write it as code and share it. And the minute it's in the field, it locks into my body. So a lot of what I'm sharing is kind of like live transmission of something I'm working, and then it gets put out and it lands in my body. So it acts as a tool for calibration.
I love that. I love so much of what you shared. I love that, you know, furthering that differentiation from the kind of like, we don't need to be reaching for telepathy. We don't need to be reaching for some other way. And I think that comes through so beautifully. And you celebrate being in form. Like it is such a place of richness to be in form. It's a gift. And you just write so beautifully about um, the kind of virility and what's the other word I wanted to use? just the kind of raw texture of existence. Like you really embrace that in how you transmit. And I love the idea of this living transmission. And I think, part of what I receive from, being in your field is that real deep acceptance of all of the differentiated textures of reality, regardless of, um, yeah, whether they have a sheen of light or, beauty, that there's an acceptance of the kind of, yeah, more guttural, like primal, like disassociating and like pooling into this kind of primordial soup, and then reconfiguring from this place of like complete disintegration. And um yeah, I guess I just have a reflection that I love that about how you transmit, but I'm curious, how that informs. Also, you speak a lot about the erotic, and I think what is most erotic about your work is that you include it all, like the grit and the yeah, the disgust, like every single expression of the human is part of this transmission that you are um, putting out. And so I'd love for you to speak into kind of this idea of embodying the raw and erotic power of eternality, as you say.
Where to begin? I think it's exactly as you said. It's like you can't be in full erotic power if you're narrowing that down to mean specific things. Like that's not hitting the mark. Raw erotic power comes from the capacity to be in all spaces, all shapes, all configurations, and to know how to be alive through them. That's that's the eroticism of it, is to feel the despair and the heartbreak and the grief and know that you're still so alive through it, and that it's a bestowal and you can do something with that. There is power within that. There is capacity to initiate yourself through that. A lot of what we see within the consciousness is that it gets stuck in these spaces. It sees them as unpalatable, locked down, detrimental. Like they're spaces that are often perceived or labeled or pathologized as negative, damaging, so on. But they're actually spaces that we get like the most power. We find most of our power. And so I have this like morbid fascination with being in like the darkest spaces and still being most alive. And I think it's part of like this neurodivergency as well, is that raw honesty. Like you can't help but like be honest, even if it's like at a detriment. And I find it really challenging that people can't just accept that they're messy. They can't own what they're feeling. To me, it's really confronting, because I, within my own personal experience, am like very willing to put my hand up and say like, I'm this today. I'm a mess. I'm a puddle right now. Like this past week, I'm falling apart and I'm reconfiguring and I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and I have so much rage. And you know what? I'm actually projecting that towards this person. I'm really angry at this person, or I'm really angry at this event that happened in my life. I'm really okay with claiming like the trauma and the scope of being a human, because we have this tendency to want to erase everything. Oh, trauma's bad. The only way that we're going to be in our power is to like clear that, erase it, get rid of it, like remove all like traces of it from the body. I don't believe in that. Like I believe that when we're talking about coming back into power and regenerative capacity as humans at this point in time, it's knowing that the trauma has a right to be there, not like I'm trying to like word it so that we're understanding the nuance, not letting the trauma sit there and kind of fester and rot and like take over and necrotize the system. But in terms of like acknowledging that it was a part of our path, it was a part of our story. To deny it is then inevitably going to deny a part of the aspect that was involved in it. So when we can give full space to that and we can be alive even with that existing in the body, having imprints in the body, then we're in our full erotic power. Then those things, although there might be echoes of them, they're not governing the body. They're not the authority in the body. The eroticism of being alive is the authority, is the true essence. So it's why it comes through my work and my writing is we need to be playing in like those paradoxes of being most powerful when we're most broken, and most broken when we're most powerful. You know, like there is always these like simultaneous truths that seek to derail each other if you can't comprehend or have coherence around how they both have to exist. And then they're like the midpoint exists as well. So it's like that's where eroticism comes through. It's like polarity, neutralization, all potentiality from that as well. And I'm really fascinated on that, and being being an alchemist in that space. Like it's very easy to be victimized by your experiences when you're not alchemizing them, in terms of when you're not actually stepping in and being like the magician or the alchemist within that space and going, these are my raw materials. What am I going to do with them? What potion am I making? What magic am I going to create from this? If you're just sitting with the density of the raw material and you're not moving it and you're not creating something from it, you will be swallowed by it. But if you look at it and you say, I've got this, what am I going to do? Let's see what happens when we merge them. Let's see what happens when we change the shape here and here, the form, when we re-encrypt it, when we re-encode it. If we're like, you know, we have so much ability to quantumly play. And then that's where we start to have really big leaps and bounds within our feeling of being free, because we can't be bound to any single form when we know how to constantly change the form and change like the format of our experience.
I feel like this might actually be leading me into, I thought we wouldn't get to this, but I I'm fascinated by this term that you use, spiritually androgynous, as you know, part of like how you self-identify and you know, part of what you bring to your work. And I feel like it's fascinating in the context of this kind of fixation on the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and you know, kind of really kind of calcifying concepts around these terms. And I'm curious, not only from like a point of view of your work, but just more broadly speaking, like what is spiritual androgyny and how can it serve as a guide for us in this time of kind of radical perversion around gender? And I'm trying to word this in a way that feels true, but also this kind of holy merging of the masculine and feminine that is part of this, you know, evolutionary unfoldment of humanity. Like, what does that term mean to you, and how do you play with it?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge what you're saying first and foremost, because I think the way that you worded it, like this calcification around terms, is really important. And um, as we shared, like prior to recording, like it's really hard when you've been in like dogmatic spaces. It creates this like tarnishing of the way that you engage with certain materials that are divine, like they are sacred and pure, but then the way that you've had them like fed to you has polluted the system. So you're trying to re-engage with them from a point that isn't like, it doesn't have that quality to it. I think when it comes to like the divine feminine and masculine, I'm just trying to think where I want to go with this. Um, so spiritual androgyny is like really simple. I think that people like try and overcomplicate it. Like if you were to drop into your body and to open like your vertical channel and just to allow God's source to flow through you, like ascending and descending, and kind of start to have that 0 point stabilization, that's what spiritual androgyny feels like. It's just like we need to move away from concepts. We're very, very fixated on mentalizing and being like, what is the divine feminine? What is the divine masculine? How do we interact with these? Oh, divine feminine is this and this and this. And we create like a checklist of like categorizing and boxing qualities that is her or that he is. A lot of the time when we're like, really fixated on these energies, it's just reflecting to us this yearning that we have within ourselves for some sort of like stabilization of those energies anyway. And I find that really interesting within people that are always talking about like Eros Gamos type frameworks and oh, like this is happening and he's anchoring and he wants her and they want to be united. Like, no, I think you want to be united. Like, it's a lot of like the story that gets attached is like a projection field. It doesn't mean there isn't like aspects of truth, but we romanticize the feminine and masculine merging as if it is some sort of like romantic relationship. It's the way that we do it in the same sense, and we create like mother, father, God to be like parents, and we look to them as parents. It's like yes, but no, and we really humanize the relationships. We create these. We project the human relationships onto cosmic energies, and it doesn't work that way. And the minute we do that, we're going to distort the way that we're engaging with them. So if we're speaking about spiritual androgyny, we need to be experiencing it somatically and having a visceral understanding of what those energies feel like merged. And that's kind of where we need to be as a whole. We're very locked in on the way that I get confirmation, the way that I know or locate myself in truth is by having like visual seeing, like I can connect with guides, I can connect with memories and stories. We like to have a lot of like visual input and stimulus that is reaffirming to us. That can be really distracting from being like seeing blind or like walking blind and allowing the body to really be speaking the truth. And that's been a big part of my experience, is that my vision doesn't show me like collective memories or specific realms. I work in like the back end. I see like the coding underneath the realms. And it was always a sore point for me of like, oh, I'm not accessing. I'm very open, but like, why am I not accessing into these spaces? Until it became really apparent that like it can be really distracting. And if you're needing to work with like re-encrypting and recoding, or working with like pure templating, sometimes memories can be disruptive. Sometimes working with like the visual field can be disruptive. So bringing it back into somatically processing and being able to have the cellular activation of what those energies are is like a really like high fidelity experience. Like you're just shifting the way that you're tuning the system and the way that you're receiving truth. So it's just a unified experience of the cosmic energies. And I could go into that and like fluff it and like elaborate, but I don't think it really needs it. I think we're like moving away from the center point when we're doing that. I just want to say to people, drop in, go into 0 point, feel your body. That's spiritual androgyny. Breathe that through, allow that to stabilize your system, and then return there as much as possible and operate from that space. That's it. It's not complex. We overcomplicate it, or we desire the story that like frills it and makes it beautiful. And we're beautifying creatures. We need story, but sometimes we also need to like pull the story back a little bit.
I love that we got into the specific way that you connect with your own capacity as a quantum mechanic, because I feel like we can kind of flatten our projection around what that means, and that there's only one way to work with the quantum. And so it's really, I'm reflecting that it's really fascinating, and I loved hearing about your specific manner of working with quantum embodiment. And I'm just in a great appreciation of the way that you um, move quite surgically. There's a kind of an element of like holy reclamation around, this kind of deeply penetrative element that I think has been, again, another framework, but the kind of the medical industrial complex and the way that it has coded our consciousness to fear penetration and to fear that kind of like standing in the light of truth and receiving recodes. And so there's just a real sense of inherent safety in how you work and move. And that's from experiencing a session with you, and as well as I have a beautiful audio transmission with some quantum architecture that I'm going to revisit after this episode, and just being a light with your codes. But I'm curious, Sheena, do you have anything to ask Jade? Do you like to jump in?
Well, I wanted to just reflect too on the story sometimes being distracting or the visual being distracting. And I receive that messaging a lot within my own work, that it's this the story that it can be really helpful because it allows us to move through energies and to work with them. If we're doing so consciously, we're not going to get stuck. We're going to process and be, in harmony with that journey. Um, but it's not always necessary, and sometimes it can be distracting because of that charge. We can get stuck in that, and if we're not needing to hold that, within this expression or this experience, or it's time to move forward, or maybe the shift in our architecture doesn't allow for that story to be held anymore, the charge can be more harmful than anything. And I like how you explained using the words spiritual androgyny, because as you're speaking into the central pillar and being in the 0 point, I kind of see that as a unification. And of course we romanticize the union of the feminine and masculine, or the polarities, because it's quite beautiful. It is beautiful, and there is so much, I feel, collective desire to have that unification. But if we get stuck in the story around that, then it creates, I guess, what I want to say is, through your words and how you're speaking to it, I'm seeing how there can be these like leaks within the energetic field there, within somebody who's really stuck in that story, or with any of us that is stuck in the story. And yeah, that just dropped. It just dropped. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I personally believe it comes down to individual templating as well. But depending on how you're supposed to weave your medicine and how you're going to interact with the fields is going to like very much exactly that. Like it's going to dictate your relationship to that and your need to have story, or your need to be more like methodical and surgical. For me, it's kind of like I love creating story, but I don't need story. Like I don't need story to process. I very much work in like pure coding. And I think story to me would be like too messy, too much, like too much material there. I like the surgical element of being in that coding, in that sort of like substrate, in like the walls and like the underneath and everything. Whereas for someone else, they're going to be require so much more of that like direct experience with those realms, with those lineages, with those storylines, with those arcs. And that's their piece. Like they genuinely require it. And it's why I think it's really important for there to be for people to be made aware of recognizing their own templating and what their own needs are. Because as you said, Alyssa, it's like we can really flatten the experience of, oh, if I'm activating or embodying this, it means like I'm experiencing this realm in this way. Or like this dimensional layer is connected to this lineage and this frequency. Therefore, my experience of that should be these things. I have never experienced other dimensions the way that they are written about and the way that they are spoken about by most people. It's just not my experience at all because I'm not in them. I'm like in the walls of them, if that makes sense. So it's not my piece to be in those spaces and to be having that experience. It would detract away from my like function and through my design. For other people, they very much need to be imbued in that. And there's no like, there is literally no hierarchy within that because there are times where I'm like, I would love to be there. I would love to be in that experience and having that story, but I honor the truth for me. And so I want to just make that clear that I'm not dismissing having story. I think it's really dependent on who you are as an individual, but also with the caveat of being aware of not to be like sucked into the story and feeling like you need to pressurize that experience if it's not true for you and you're just creating projection fields. Because I think for a long time that's what I did. I was like so desperate to have these experiences that I can very much create any sort of holographic pocket that I want. It's like you as quantum beings, you can. So you have to be able to distinguish between the difference of creating a holographic pocket that you're just projecting yourself into to have that experience or having the real interaction with those realms.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Um, Earlier you were speaking about your medicine, and I wanted to, as you were talking about your playing with language and how you sometimes have tried to simplify it, I suppose it's not your words, but as you were speaking about that, I was I was being shown my own experience with your language, and even just what I shared earlier about how reading something that you shared on your journey with motherhood, even though you didn't speak any of the details, I felt seen. And the reason for that is because it's encoded. Your embodied experience is encoded, and it is that living transmission. And that is part of your medicine. And if you were to simplify that, you would be kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, dumbing it down. And yes, it might be too much for some people, or it might in some situations or scenarios or whatever it is, like there's a moment where maybe that's not for me. Maybe I'm not ready to receive the the full encoding there. And that's okay. But that doesn't mean you have to show up any less. Right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are we needing to wrap up? Is it time? I was keeping track of it, but you said 11 your
I love
time.
it. I can go
That,
like 10, 15 more if
okay.
we need. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had one thing, and then we can I'd love to also then open up a space for you to talk about how people can find you, how people can work with you, what are your current offerings. But I love something that you shared that connects up with what you were sharing just then, I think before we hit record about, so in recognition of all of the varied templates that we embody all of it is needed as part of this earth project. And I love that you were speaking into your view of our role on earth and how we're co-dreaming with the earth, and that we're not kind of meant to just ascend out, like we're not just meant to evolve out and like leave earth behind. I'd love for you to speak into that, and then we can flow into the next.
Yeah. Coming from the ascension community background, I think ascension's quite like a broad label, but like specifically speaking to like the bifurcation narratives and like ascending, descending timeline, and the earth body was like, or like this dimension was a descending space, and that ultimately that was just going to be this entropic experience that implodes on itself. That's like the narrative, the kind of context that I had come from, and that was really dismantling within myself because I found it like I just hated it. I really reached a point where I felt like it was disrespectful. That I just felt this like very strong sense that that was not a truth for me. So I shared with you both, like prior to us recording, that the birth injury, and that led me back to my sort of like my mission, and working with the medicine, and coinciding with that and quantum regenerative technology was the understanding that we are here to work with the earth body, and that there isn't part of that ascension, which is just like the accretion and the like activation embodiment of higher frequencies. It doesn't necessarily have to do with anything of leaving a space. It's to do with like what can be held in the body and embodied. A lot of that is connected to the earth templating being restored. And we hear this a lot, but it gets confusing with different narratives. Like, what are we doing? People are always talking about ascending, leaving planet. You have people that are speaking about this being a fallen matrix. You constantly being exposed to language about like the cabal and power, powers to be that are manipulating the reality fields here in the consciousness. And it can be hard to locate yourself and to know what that means as a human and what that means for how you're embodying yourself and the trajectory of that. But I feel like since I've been returning back into the seat of myself, a really strong deepening with the relationship with the earth body, and to the degree where in recent times the physical body and the earth body are really calibrating as one system. And we know this, that like the templating connects into each other, but there's always an original intact template, even within something that is like corrupted. That's why you can physically regenerate. That's why you can regenerate anything, because the original blueprint is still intact. And if you move back to that layer of creation, you can restore it back through to the form. So it's the same thing within the earth body, is going in and uncovering and accessing and interfacing with the original blueprint and bringing that back through the layers of creation, through the morphogenetic fields, into the actual expression of the form, and the way that this field, this dimensional plane is going to be recoded and re-encrypted. So I really don't believe in like a descending space. I think that I have a lot of I have a strong sense of, even if this was to be like a descending plane, I'd stay here and I'd choose to incarnate until the end anyway. Like I'm content with that. I don't need to gallivant off. Big part of my experience is being able to be outside time anyway. Like I know the experience of being completely formless very well. And I enjoy being in form. I enjoy being here. And I think that we have a responsibility to hear, and to the consciousness forms that are here. Like even the trees are really coming back to life, and the network, the way that they communicate through the earth body is really powerful. So all of these like these ways in which the consciousness moves through the ley lines, through these kind of mycelium networks, through the trees, is activating. We're seeing shifts within the earth body itself, like these like geometrical, cavernous, how do I word it? Just corrections, I guess, that is like supporting these like tonal reverberations within the planetary body, and then we're seeing that mirrored through our body and through our like cavernous like cavities, and the way that we allow tones and sound to move and reverberate through our body. So we're seeing these like really beautiful shifts, and I think that that's just going to continue, and ultimately like you do you do get to like play out the reality that you're holding, that you're working towards, and you're weaving. So the more that you weave in this like corrective, regenerative experience with the earth body, the more you experience that as a feedback loop, and the more you come into deeper communication and telepathy with the aspects of her, and the more you kind of start to attune to being a collaborator with that. So you kind of, it's one of those funny things with consciousness, is you get to locate and position yourself. And then once you position yourself, you're always going to create and stabilize a field that supports that reality. And that's why people who are having these like bifurcating narratives and working with that material, like it is a truth for them, their reality is coded to that. And their body is responding to that, like the DNA is activating in a certain way that is going to support that trajectory. So again, it comes down to a matter of personal integrity and knowing what your truth is, because you have to be wary of where you're positioning yourself, because you will code yourself to that reality. Yeah.
Wow, yes. It's powerful. I feel like that's a beautiful place to invite people into connecting with you. So where can we find you? Are you offering, I know you were offering Continuum, the 12-month container. Is that ongoing?
Yeah, so we just finished the continuum. It ended up being just over 6 months,
Okay.
and it was really beautiful. I set it as 12 months, and then we were like, if it needs to finish sooner, it will. And it ran its course, and it was really lovely. It was a very like experimental space. And part of the reason why I like creating long containers is for experimentation. I'm not really a facilitator that's like, this is the like the curriculum, this is what we're doing, sit down, do your homework. I'm like, so in the fields, when I was outside time, I was experiencing this, and I want to bring this in, and I want to see what that's like when you implement it. How do you experience it? What does that do? So we become these like more of a team, like working with different threads. But in terms of working with me at the moment, I have my long-term one-on-one containers. So my mentorship containers, I have space for people in those at the moment. And I'm just about to open up my single sessions again. I haven't had the capacity the past 2 years to be working with like a lot of different people, but I've just felt recently like the call to drop back into that, because I'm missing the interaction with different people, different bodies, different energies. So I'll be getting that up and running this week. It will probably be up and running before you release this. And then I have like a mini course this week, but that won't be out. Like this will be released after that. But yeah, the plan is to offer a course coming up soon on being a living transmission. So I'm sitting with that, and I'm like working the structure for that at the moment, but I'm really excited because I'm wanting to bring people into a space of spiritual androgyny, like 0 point, becoming living transmission and working their coding and their medicine. So that's like a watch this space to be like advised at some point.
Beautiful. Well, we will link to your website and your Instagram in the show notes so people can find you. And is there anything else that we didn't ask that you feel like wants to come through, or that you wish we would have asked?
That feels pretty good. yeah, I'm just appreciative for being here and having a discussion. I'm very much in my own little bubble, and so it's really nice to like come out occasionally and be a human and interact with other women. So I'm thankful for that experience, and I'm thankful to be able to have the discussion with you both. And it's just lovely to be speaking about these things in a field where it's like received and in resonance and held, because so much of my reality is me doing the speaking and having to hold that field as well. So to
Mm.
be in a field that's already like held and supported and like recognizes is really relaxing to my nervous system. So I'm appreciative of that.
Oh, it's beautiful, beautiful feedback. We're so grateful to have you here. It's an honor and a pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in. And we will see you next time.